Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming again. This is week 4 of our study on living faithfully. As usual, I wanted to add a few helpful notes for this week's lesson. If you are still wondering what this study is all about, if you're just encountering this video, I want to ask you to go to lesson 1. Each of these videos builds on each other, and it builds on the book called Living Faithfully, Human Sexuality and the United Methodist Church. And so if you really want to get the most out of this video, I suggest that you go back to week 1 and watch 1, 2, 3, and then this video, number 4, and also read the book that I just mentioned as a tool to help you understand what this is all about and get some background on this. We're going through this as a church family, and so I was hoping these videos might add a little bit of background and a little bit of help for this study. So this week, we're looking at lesson number 4, which is called, Where Are We Now? And you saw some timelines in your chapters. I think there's also one in this particular chapter, and it covered a lot of ground, and there's been a lot of conversation over the past 50 years that we've been having this discussion on human sexuality. But there was one thing I want to catch you up a little bit on what has happened since the book was written, and also what happened. What happened in a spot that the book actually didn't cover. And I kind of knew about this, and I went and asked some people about this particular episode, and it wasn't in the book because it didn't technically go anywhere, I think, but it's just interesting, and I thought you'd like to know. So I'm going to cover that little, there's 2 general conferences involved in that, and then we'll go to what has happened afterwards. So first, on your timeline, if you look at the gap between 1988 and 1992, those are 2 general conference years, and there was a study commission that was commissioned at the 1988 General Conference, and it was tasked with the task of following up with this topic on human sexuality and really studying the Bible, studying the ancient languages that the Bible's written in, and digging into what the Scripture actually said on this topic and what homosexuality actually was. So let me take you back in time a little bit to the 1980s. This is during the AIDS epidemic. And so homosexuality had, the gay rights movement had kind of come out of the Stonewall riots of 1968. They had become something that people were now kind of talking about a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, the AIDS virus hits, and it hits gay communities especially hard. And so this was a topic of concern for a lot of churches in these urban areas because a lot of their parishioners or a lot of people in their communities were suffering from AIDS, and they were trying to figure out how to help. There was a lot of fear around AIDS and around how you could catch it. There were a lot of rumors around that you could catch it from touching someone or that kind of thing. And there was a lot of stigma against for people who had AIDS because people thought of it as a gay disease. And so being gay was now out into the forefront because now there was a disease supposedly associated with it. And so 1988 was a time when people were still in this mix of thinking about being gay in that way. And so the United Methodist Church at a general conference by a 2/3 vote voted to start this study commission. So the committee, we'll call it a committee. The committee was comprised of 13 white males, 6 white females, 2 males of color, and 1 female of color. There was also 1 person from the Central Conferences, a male from the Philippines, and 7 members were lay, while the remainder were clergy people, and 1 person identified as an LGBTQ person on this committee. So for 4 years, this committee got together, they studied the issue. As you can tell, the committee's not, it's not a perfect makeup. There's not a whole lot of people that are from central conferences. And so, there is some weakness in that because, didn't really comprise the whole church maybe. But for 4 years, these folks studied, they dug into the Scripture together, they met together, they tried to understand this complex issue of human sexuality together in light of the Scriptures, primarily, and also through reason, experience, and tradition. And I want to thank, first of all, my good friend and colleague, Reverend Sarah Campbell, who you may remember her if you were at our charge conference this past year. She was the presiding elder at that charge conference, and she works here at the North Central District. She's the pastor at Forest United Methodist Church up in the Ocala area. She's been a good friend of mine for a long time, and she's doing her doctoral dissertation on some of the splits around the Civil War and the split we're going through now in the United Methodist Church, and kind of paralleling the two. And this is a part of her dissertation that I'm going to be reading from, so I want to give her credit. And she talks about this committee, and it presented its report at the 1992 General Conference. This was the report from the majority of the committee members. It was called the majority report of this committee. First, the committee stated that the 7 references to homosexuality in the Bible represented ancient culture and not the will of God. Second, the committee proclaimed that homosexuality is a normal human sexual variant that can be healthy and whole. Third, the committee stated that covenantal, committed, and monogamous homosexual relationships should be affirmed. Finally, the committee concluded that its findings were supported by God's grace, which is visible in the life of lesbian and gay Christians. Thus, the majority and so that was what the majority report recommended. Now, in the report, 17 members of the committee voted to ask General Conference to remove the discipline language condemning homosexual practice and replace it with another acknowledgement that the church has been unable to arrive at a common mind. 4 members concluded that the committee did not find any agreement on the issue. Instead, they recommended that the current language be retained, and 1 person on the committee abstained from voting. So as a result, the minority report, the report from a minority, 4 people on that committee, as opposed to the 17 in the majority, they recommended that the language stay the same. So just like here in our church, there were people that agreed and disagreed, and they spent 4 years digging into it themselves. So, you might feel a little bit better about our church not being of one mind on that right now. So there was a small change to the Book of Discipline. As a result, was not a huge change, but that was part of what that committee, after 4 years of studying this issue, decided. And so here we are. So if you wonder why we've been fighting about it this much, we've tried study commissions, we've tried votes, we've tried reconciliation, we've tried splitting the church up into different areas, and all this just keeps going around and around and around. So now, here's what has happened since that book was printed. So the 2020 General Conference has been delayed multiple times. 2020, of course, it didn't happen because of COVID, and then it was delayed until 2022, and most of the international delegates were having a lot of trouble with their visas, and there were still COVID restrictions that were some in and some out in some countries, and so the 2020 General Conference in 2022 had to be canceled. And so now, the 2020 General Conference is scheduled for 2024. So it's not the 2024 General Conference, it's the 2020 General Conference, postponed and now being held in 2024. Also, last year, it happened in the late summer, the Florida Conference, and since then some other conferences, have been sued by churches wanting to disaffiliate outside of paragraph 2553. If you remember, paragraph 2553 is that paragraph giving churches who disagree over the practice of human sexuality, they disagree, they feel like the United Methodist Church is not doing the right thing, they can disaffiliate using paragraph 2553. So the Florida Conference was the first to be sued. It was sued by over 100 churches within the conference that wanted to disaffiliate outside of paragraph 2553. Some churches have since pulled out of the lawsuit, but it is still on the books. Many churches, I want to say, did this outside of their pastor's knowledge. They're allowed to because of the way that our church is structured as a nonprofit. The pastor does not own the church. And some pastors I know moved into churches last summer. They moved into churches just like a lot of us did, like I did, and they found out when the article was printed in the Tallahassee Democrat that their church was a part of the lawsuit, and so they had no idea. And so here they are leading a church that is a plaintiff in this lawsuit against their own Florida conference. Kind of puts them in an awkward spot, don't you think? And so, we are not a part of that lawsuit here at First Church of Dade City. I don't know if any of these have pulled out, but all the churches around us are, except for Blanton United Methodist, just up the road, a little church out in the rural area out there. So Ridge Manor is a part of the lawsuit. Bushnell is a part of the lawsuit. Spring Lake is a part of the lawsuit. First Methodist of Zephyr Hills is a part of the lawsuit. And I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. But a lot of the churches in our neighborhood are. Like I said, Blanton is not. Oh, and San Antonio, Community UMC of San Antonio is also a part of the lawsuit. So this is affecting churches in our local area. So meanwhile, though, the Florida Conference is working with churches who do want to disaffiliate using paragraph 2553. Here at First Dade City, we're going to have an information session on March 5th from 2:30 to 4:30 in the CLC. You'll be able to hear from Reverend Nako Kellum, who's a former United Methodist pastor and a current pastor in the Global Methodist Church. This is the more conservative breakaway denomination that promises to keep the current language around human sexuality, to prohibit active, self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being ordained in our church. They have kind of promised to keep that language the same. And you'll also be able to hear from our district superintendent, Reverend Dr. David Allen. He'll be speaking on the United Methodist Church's behalf, on the Florida Conference's behalf, and he'll be talking about the continuing United Methodist Church. And we'll be talking some about that from that perspective. I want to add a note. Reverend Kellum and I were ordained in the same annual conference. We received our ordination, we knelt down, and the bishop ordained us and blessed us during that time at the same annual conference. And so, as this has gone forward and Reverend Kellum has agreed to speak, it affects all of us. It is a family split. She and I went through candidacy together. We were a part of, ordination retreats, and we were ordained there at the same annual conference. I would have been a few spots behind her in line because she's K and I'm R. And so, this is not a fun thing for anybody, and it affects us all deeply. It's something that even clergy feel really deeply because, if it's hard on the congregations, it's also hard on the clergy. So, what now for us after this? A vote for disaffiliation can be called, and a disaffiliation would happen if there were a 2/3 yes vote on the matter at a church conference. And I'm not going to steal all of Reverend Allen's thunder because he'll be talking about some of these, but I just want to prep you on this. That's option number one. The disaffiliation vote can be called, and it has to pass by a 2/3 vote of the people that are the members of the church that are at a church conference. Option number two, church council can decide that no vote is needed now, and people at that point could decide on their own if they still wanted to be with the United Methodist Church. So that option would allow people to decide kind of on their own whether or not they still wanted to be a part of the United Methodist Church. And also, number three, this is a down the road option. Disaffiliation is also an option for later on as well. There's currently no replacement to paragraph 2553 because there's been no general conference to replace it, and only general conference can make those roles. But what happened before 2553 was that annual conferences kind of decided on a case-by-case basis what the terms were for disaffiliation. And I imagine that would be what it would fall to that point as well. So, but churches disaffiliated before 2553, and they'll disaffiliate after. And that would be what that would happen if this church wanted to disaffiliate after on down the road in later years. And so some of you might be wondering, why do people want to disaffiliate to begin with? And I think it's important just to say it out loud here and to speak clearly to you that it is based on a fear of what might happen to the United Methodist Church. That the United Methodist Church at some point in the future might approve of gay marriage, and that conservatives need to get out of the way now before it's too late. Nothing has changed in the discipline of the United Methodist Church. No one is being forced to marry a same-sex couple. Yes, it's happening in some places, and those pastors are being disciplined. Granted, not to a lot of people's likeness, or not to a lot of people's approval, but we don't know what happens in those decisions, because those cases are kept confidential. They're handled within the church, and we don't know all the facts and figures. So I try to kind of reserve judgment for those. I understand why they're frustrating for people. And yes, there are people that are in active violation of the discipline that are doing that ministry, and it violates our discipline, yes. But as of now, our Florida Conference is still following the discipline. Our Florida Conference is still bound by those same letters. And something that I think I need to mention too, as its successive general conferences, it's not like this is a cakewalk to get the language changed, because the more conservative areas of the church that are in Africa and in the Philippines and in some other areas, they are more conservative on this issue, and those are the areas that are growing, and the U.S. church that is more progressive as a whole is shrinking. So it's not like this is going to be a cakewalk to do either. So, and also we have to remember, we are here in Dade City. Human sexuality is not an issue that our community is demanding that we answer, nor are we planning any sort of outreach to the gay community in our surrounding area. You can believe whatever you want about human sexuality, and I don't think it really affects our work together here in Dade City, since it's not something in our community that is a big issue that we have to have an answer for. In the scriptures, our main job as a church is to make disciples of Christ. And following the language at the very end of your chapter 4, I think we can hold each other loosely on this. We can believe differently on this issue. We already believe differently on several other issues, and it doesn't hurt us. I think that in that main job that we have as a church of making disciples, this is something that we can agree to disagree on and still move together. And I'll say it again, we believe in salvation by faith as Protestants, that if you believe in Jesus Christ, you are saved and you got a ticket to heaven. So if we believe that, whether you're gay, straight, or somewhere in between, we believe we're going to be in the same place together when we pass away, when we go to glory. We're going to go to glory, to heaven, and we're all going to be in the same place. And so, why not act like it here on heaven is kind of part of my thought on this as well. But I understand that this is a tough issue for folks. But I do think that we can hold each other loosely on this issue as we work together for Christ. I hope this study and this conversation has been fruitful to you. If your class ends without any sort of agreement or consensus, I think that's okay. You've been able to talk about this and talk with people who think differently on this issue, and the building didn't fall down, right? You've been able, without this book, without this conversation, the folks who were a part of this study, I know not everybody was, but without it, we would be stuck in our own echo chambers. We wouldn't have been able to really study and get our minds around this issue. We wouldn't have been able to really learn the history and learn the things that have happened and what the different issues really are. We wouldn't have been able to hear from voices from different sides and different places in this issue, and we would have been less because of that. So your group might not end with consensus, and that's okay. I hope we can appreciate the conversation we had and agree to love each other and hold each other in prayer from now forward, no matter what happens. Next week is going to be a different video and sort of covering this study, but also not a particular lesson. I hope this study, like I said, has been fruitful to you and that you've been able to talk about this issue with others in a Christ-centered and respectful way, because we are always going to disagree about something. And the better that we can talk to each other about it, we can hold each other in love and in prayer, and the more we can discuss things and discuss Bible issues together when we don't agree, it helps us be able to articulate these things to others as well. And so, we didn't ask for anybody's mind to be changed at the beginning of this study, and if that is the case, we're okay. The point is that we talked about it, and we still love each other, and the building didn't fall in. and we're all going to be in the same room together when we get up to heaven anyway. So I hope and pray that this has been a fruitful time for you, like I said, and may God bless you. I will see you next week for our Sunday video.